Chapter 9, Key Issue 2, Agriculture. Content Objective. Identify and explain agriculture origin locations. I-CAN Statement 1. Identify and explain the major crop and livestock hearths. 2. Describe the major differences between subsistence and commercial agriculture. 3. Explain differences between developed and developing countries in food consumption. 4. Identify and explain the 3 agricultural revolutions and the 4th agricultural revolution. Alright, so we have hunters and gatherers. Hunters and gatherers evolved to the first agricultural revolution, but prior to the first agricultural revolution, to 8,000 years ago, people were in DTM stage 1, where there was ebb and flow of CBR because they were following their foods. When food was abundant, their population would go up, and when food wasn't abundant, their population would go down. Hunters and gatherers today make up 0.005% of the world's population. The first agricultural revolution is referred to as the Neolithic agricultural revolution. The first agricultural revolution is going to see a change from hunters and gatherers to more sedentary or subsistent farming. As they domesticate plants, populations will slowly grow over time. And as they slowly grow over time, we'll begin to see the first civilizations in Sumeria, or the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia today, and then we'll begin to see slow integration of animals, and several reasons for this happening. One is the Ice Age, the last Ice Age that happened 10,000 years ago. It coincided with the Ice Age, with the melting of, with the elevation of the increase of climate, and also the increase of water levels led to changing dietary habits. Cultural factors, though, to keep in mind, it was very slow. The world's population began to grow more rapidly, but at a very slow rate. Environmental factors or cultural factors, a preference for living in a fixed place was more favorable than chasing animals like hunters and gatherers. And so what happened is people began to deliberately cut plants or dropped berries on the ground intentionally, and they learned to pour water over a site and to introduce manure, so introduce natural fertilizers. And over these small improvements, we began to see plant cultivation, or the modification and harvesting of plants, in a deliberate process. Again, it can't be documented with certainty. Not all historians or anthropologists agree on the location. One thing they do agree is that plants and animals were domesticated in hearths independently without influence. So agriculture originated in multiple hearths around the world, not just one. And we know it was for subsistence and not for economic gain. Looking at the first agricultural revolution, the multiple hearths are where, again, we see as possibly the first hearths in the world. First is Southwest Asia with the Mesopotamian civilizations like Sumeria and later the Babylonians, etc., were known to harvest barley, wheat, lentil, and then they also were noted as one of the first to introduce cattle and livestock, goats, pigs, and sheep. And the domestication of the dog was also in that region about 12,000 years ago. East Asia cultivated rice about 10,000 years ago as well, so about the same time as South Asia. With the cultivation of rice in the Yangtze River, and they also in the Yellow River grew Malay through vegetative planting. So that's stripping a plant of, or stripping a part of a plant and replanting it. That process is more intensive than seed planting, because seed planting, then you let the spores and the seedlings disperse or diffuse naturally with winds. Here we have other hearths. Sub-Saharan Africa is known about 8,000 years ago. They harvested yams, Malayan rice. And it might have been independent. The rice cultivation might have been independent from East Asia. And then Latin America, Mexico and Peru about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. They were the hearths for beans and cotton. Peru for the potato. And the southern part of the United States is possibly a hearth for squash with Native Americans. All right, here's a map depicting the distribution of the first agricultural hearths. And keep in mind, when we have the first agricultural hearths, this will take us, as we evolve as civilizations, we'll eventually see the Italian Renaissance, where now we'll see European explorers exploring oceans, and with that will come colonization. With colonization will come the Columbia Exchange, and then with Columbia Exchange, now we're seeing the movement of these crops that are grown in these hearths to different locations with European colonies. All right, the four agricultural revolutions are defined as the following. You have the Neolithic, the first agriculture, followed by the industrial or British agriculture in the 18th century. Then you have the Green Agricultural Revolutions, originated in 1945, but really we don't see the diffusion until the 1970s. And then now we look at biogenetic revolution, or GMOs. Take a moment to review what you've learned. All right. When we see seed and vegetative planting in the various agricultural hearths, they'll eventually evolve through time, and when they evolve through time, they'll begin to adapt practices that are subsistent practices or intensive practices like double cropping. That's when not every region can double crop, but double cropping is usually where you have warm winters and obviously warm summers. This is done in like southern China and Taiwan. Rarely done in India, but it's, again, double cropping is very common in China. Coppens said that climate determined a lot of agricultural practices, like we'll talk about, pastoral nomadism in arid climates, arid desert climates, slash and burn, slash and burn is found in tropical climates. So again, and then rice is found in really hot tropical climates as well, or subtropical climates. Then we see domestication of animals with pastoral nomadism, using transhumanists, moving livestock, cattle, or goats, or sheep up to higher elevations when it's hot. When it cools down, they would then go to the lower pastures that are abundant with arable land and vegetation. Take a moment to review. All right, the second agricultural revolution is known as the British Agricultural Revolution. It happened with the Enclosure Movement Act. The Enclosure Movement Act was a government policy that mandated farmers that were inefficient to move to the cities for secondary sector jobs, and the efficient farmers were left into the rural areas to farm. That created large farms, introduced forms of mechanization. So this large interregional migration happened. With mechanization, you see now the use of technology. So you'll see tractors, or not sorry, back up. You'll see seed drills and then plows and then tractors. This will be the beginning of commercial agriculture, where now you're selling agricultural products for a crop. You're not eating it as a family or on the farm. This will also advance double cropping. You'll see 4 field systems where they'll integrate 4 different crops and rotate them, so the fertility of the soil is maintained, so it's a healthier. You have a healthier diet, so increased life expectancy, so a diverse consumption of vegetables, but also with the rotation of the 4-crop field, it created soil that maintained fertility. And then we begin to see selective breeding. Keep in mind when we talk about GMO, selective breeding has been taking place for thousands of years. But now we see selective breeding with taking desirable organisms or desirable characteristics of organisms and replicating them. Here's a look at industrial British agricultural farming. Again, you see the plow here, and then the advancements to the tractor, or what appears to be a combine. So we begin to see now with the British or the Second Agricultural Revolution, we see technological advancements. You'll see then from the plow, you'll see tractors, you'll see combines, corn pickers, planters, factory-made farm machines. Then we'll see it evolve into university laboratories and herbicides. But with the Industrial Revolution, it also created larger farm sizes for commercial farms. We can also see the changing of what the Agricultural Revolution coincides with the Industrial Revolution. Now people are interregionally migrating to the city, working factory jobs. And now you see less farmers on a farm, characteristics of commercial farming. The third agricultural revolution is now looking at chemical farming. This is with fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicides. With pesticides and fertilizers and herbicides, now you have a reliable crop in harsh conditions that is not prime agricultural real estate or extremely fertile land, but it does require a lot of water irrigation, so it can create water shortage problems. Herbicides. Again, this will pesticides will become pest resistant, drought resistant with fertilizers. They'll create the high yield value seed like the golden seed or the dwarf rice HYV seed, and more recently we have the miracle wheat seed. And we see mass production of food in the 50s, so food processing will be a common way that people will eat their grains. They'll be processed into cereals or other boxed, non-perishable goods, changing of diet. We'll see rapid food production, and then we'll begin to see a wider gap in world food security, with now developing countries not able to produce the food at the levels of developed countries. Developed countries will be the major exporter of foods and controlling the mass circulation of foods. Here we look at fertilizer consumption. Fertilizer consumption is important because fertilizers require petroleum, and they're made of potassium and phosphorus as well as nitrogen. We can see with the Green Revolution, it's put a large increase of those chemicals, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and petroleum in developing countries. And it's created somewhat of a dilemma for developing countries, which we'll talk about later. The Green Revolution was created by Norman Borlaug. He won a Nobel Peace Prize in the 1970s. Norman Borlaug created cash crops in places that now became exporters, like Mexico, India, Pakistan, Canada, Latin America. Increased protein within the seeds, so a richer, more densely nutritious protein in the seeds, such as the miracle seeds like rice and wheat. But there is an expense on the environment because of eutrophication, the increased use of fertilizers that seep into our waterways, known as eutrophication, the methane gas. Gases from rice farming, the monoculture, stripping the land of nutrients, creating superweeds that are resistant or resistant to herbicides, and also the increase of fossil fuels. Benefits: large corporation farms in Asia, plantations, small subsistence farmers lack the resources, large gaps of geographical spread, the benefit of the agricultural revolution, Africa dietary preferences and environmental issues. Again, they are the least or the area of the world that has least adopted the green revolution techniques. Farmers' health at risk with environmental pollution. Now we're looking at a continuation of the green revolution, now more scientific farming, so genetic engineering. So now you have genetic modified foods, cellular production, and now this is the first time in world history where we're now, it's a sharp break with agricultural practices of the past several thousand years, because now we are taking organisms that are not merely studied, but actually altered. And again, it can mitigate pollution, it can create highly specialized production, as well as it's produced in a laboratory, so it's molecular and cellular based manipulation of cells and molecules. Here's an example of the two. Alright, take a moment to reflect on what you learned. 4 main uses of land. Subsistence farmers consume farm for their family on their own land. Commercial farming, they're primarily for sale in their developed countries. Subsistence farms don't have mechanization. Most of it's intense, done by hand or with limited animals. It's a high percentage of labor force, although it's declining fast. Where in developed countries, only now in some regions such as South Asia, only 40% are in primary economic sector. We look at farm sizes, use of machinery, and percentage of farmers. Developed countries 2 to 3%, USA 1%. Developing countries 44, but again it's going down fast because many are moving into secondary and tertiary sector jobs. You have the farm sizes. Remember, so farm size will tell us that they use every square inch of their land. They'll have narrow roads. They won't waste any space. Here we have subsistent, again, consumed on the farm, grown for their family. And remember, these regions face a harsh conditions in 2020 and beyond, because now with the large interregional migration of people going from primary to secondary in urban areas, now they're providing for not just their family, but people moving to urban areas, trying to keep pace with population growth. Again, few people in the United States work as farmers. Less than 2% work as farmers, but about 10% work in primary agriculture. Most of that's in supermarkets and restaurants. We can see right here, we can see each of the economic sectors. So we can see a lot of farmers that are going to be subsistent. Anytime you see a high number, we know there's subsistent farmers in Central Africa. And when we begin to see movement where there's small amount of farmers, now they're moving to mechanization and green revolution, biotechnical revolution. So highly technical, very large farms, very skilled farmers. Farms have significantly decreased in farmers, although farm size have increased dramatically. GPS is used to use the most fertile land and monitor locations, so it's highly technical. Areas of farmland per tractor, we can see the technology. With that technology, we know that there's going to be very large farms that's going to be highly mechanized. Alright, there shows a picture of contrasting subsistent farmers versus commercial farmers. Alright, take a moment to reflect on what you've learned. Alright, and that's the end of the notes.